Well, I am beyond delighted to be here with Matt Ackermann. Matt, I actually think this might be one of the most, if not the most special episode of Steal My Strategy I've ever recorded.
Well, that's high praise. I'm a big fan, huge listener, obviously a fan of yours. Gotten a chance to know you quite well over the past decade or so. And man, it is my pleasure. It's my honor to really be getting a chance to chat with you today.
Well, thank you. But the reason I said that is not an empty platitude. It's because you're the only person I've had on this podcast who I've known for 15 years.
Hmm.
I was just thinking about that. You said better part of a decade, but I was doing the math. We met back in 2009 when
That's
you were
true.
at Investment News.
Yes. Yes. And it's just been such an amazing ride to see your journey and all the success that you've had along the way. And I've been a fan from the beginning. Um, one of the coolest projects I ever got to work on, I got to work on with Robert when we did the first season of Practice Makeover together, and when I was at Investment News. And man, it seems like every time I'd have a really crazy idea when I was at Investment News, Robert, you were one of the first people I called to be like, "Hey, what do you think about doing this together?" So yeah, you've been always so generous with your time. Sometimes telling me the ideas were bad too, but always being such a creative force in this industry, man. This is such a pleasure to be able to have this conversation on this show.
Well, crazy people like crazy ideas. So I guess we're both crazy, a little bit crazy. But one of the things too, I got to call out before we even get into this, which is noteworthy, is that you may not even remember this, but the name of this podcast is Steal My Strategy, and that was chosen by you. Did you know that I ripped off that idea from you?
Well, here's the funny thing. And I think it's apropos that it's called Steal My Strategy, and the idea of the title was stolen. But we, like you
Yeah.
said, creative ideas. But the funny part was we were having a conversation, which I remember exactly where we were sitting at that conference when we had this conversation about Steal My Strategy. I'm not sure if it was T3 or Mark Council. It was one of those kind of
It's
conferences.
Riskalize.
Yes.
Fearless.
And we were
Fearless. Yeah.
sitting there together at the conference,
Yeah.
and I said, man, I wish more people would, steal a good strategy. That's where the great ideas come from. As I said earlier, just borrowing, stealing from other really creative people. So yeah, I do remember that conversation. It was awesome. And I was so proud that you guys took that idea and ran with it. Some people will sometimes say, and I'm sure you get this too sometimes, doesn't it make you mad when you see somebody else doing something that was your idea originally or something? I was like, never. Never. I didn't use it. I didn't do it. I think it's awesome when somebody takes a nugget and makes it into a pearl like that. That is really the bigger gift is execution. It's not
That's
coming up
right.
with stuff. I mean, it's just an honor that you even remembered that, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're here for good reason. You are a man with a lot of great ideas, and you're a man with ability to execute as well, which is in part why I wanted to have you now. I thought the timing was great because you released this awesome book with a few other great names that we know from the industry over at Integrated, and it's a fun book and it's a practical book. It's one advisors should read, and I'm stoked to talk about it today.
Oh, thank you, man.
What made you decide to write this book?
So it's really interesting because I never thought I would be an author. I always have enjoyed and gravitated to shorter form content, whether it be video, podcast, things that you can kind of execute and go on to the next project. Especially when I was at Investment News, there was so many little projects that you couldn't really dedicate the way you need to a book. I've kind of had a few ideas floating in my head, about different books over the years, and they always kind of got shelved because I was on to the next shiny object. Um, the I started working with Andre Moore and Paul Saganey about 4 years ago at Integrated. Andre was going off on maternity leave. She had twins. And when she was going off maternity leave, she lamented to me, "Man, I'm going to go crazy. I really need some adult contact and adult conversation when I'm on maternity leave." And she's like, "What am I going to do?" And I was like, "Well, we're going to write a book together." She goes, "What?" I was like, "You're going to give me a download. I'm going to take notes, and then I'm going to formulate it into a strategic book." And she was like, "We can't do that. Can we do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So really the book was the genesis of conversations together over this time when she's on maternity leave. And even at the beginning, I don't think I thought that I could get it done or do this, but just being able to add that layer of creativity to this project made it fun for me. And it was something that I really became passionate, not just about doing, but about completing and publishing and really getting in the hands of so many advisors so they could perhaps steal some of my strategies.
Well, I think that's what makes the book so much fun. Obviously, you had fun while you were writing it, and it's evident. The book is called Center Stage: How to Become the Star of Your Practice. And advisors really have that opportunity inside their community to be the star for their clients, to be the local community star when it comes to, their areas of specialty. And this book really shows how to do that, taking lessons from music, which is a blast. One of the things I read when I was going through the book immediately that struck me was a quote. I'm going to actually quote you. Sorry. It's weird. I hate it when people quote me on a podcast, but I'm going to quote you. And just before I quote you out of the book, you got to tell everybody, obviously, you're an Elton John fan. Is that
Oh
right?
yeah, I'm a huge music fan, huge music nerd. The book itself, there's a version that floats around somewhere in my computer here where the entire book initially was all Elton John analogies. And I think compliance and some other folks were worried it wouldn't work or it wouldn't reach as much an audience. And I think this change, and some people complain about compliance, I think by making me go back to the drawing board and adding so many different musical artists made it something that's a lot more enjoyable for everyone. Although I could probably win an Elton John trivia contest if you wanted to have one right now. So
Yeah,
go.
let's do it. Let's do it right now. I'm gonna tee up this quote with Elton John trivia. Okay.
Hmm.
So the artist formerly known as Reg Dwight
Hmm.
was who?
Was Elton John? That's Elton
There you
John's real
go.
name, right, buddy?
Isn't that something? Yeah.
Elton
So
Hercules John.
such a bizarre thing. I didn't know that till I read your book. So
Mhm.
Reginald Dwight, that was Elton John's name. So this is the quote. Now I'm going to quote Matt Ackermann. This is the first one that hit me. Even if you feel like Reg Dwight right now, there's an Elton inside of you waiting to break through, so you can be a rocket man. Hey Kyle, I'm going to read that one more time without messing it up. Okay, you'll have to edit it. All right. So here's the quote. Even if you feel like Reg Dwight right now, there's an Elton inside of you waiting to break through so you can be a rocket man.
Yeah.
That's inspiring.
I so much of it I get inspired by music. And I would sit here in this office when I would be writing, playing the songs that are in each chapter. And that's why each chapter actually is a song title by that artist, because that would be the song that's playing in this room. Funny, when I finished writing it, my wife gave me every song that's on it on a record album that is sitting here in the office. And it is because I'd just be blaring that song while I wrote that chapter. I get inspired by music and I'm inspired by advisors. I'm amazed by how entrepreneurs are able to take something and really make it flourish. Something, especially at its infancy, that might fail, not being afraid of that failure and really taking off with it. And building a team around you and getting them to believe in your mission and your vision. And that's hard. In my head, I'm like, wow, how, what kind of passion do you need so that people follow you into uncertainty? And I think that's really what this whole book experience for me was trying to understand how you're able to maintain that passion, find that passion, get the right people around you, and ultimately thrive in an experience where so many people fail, whether it be music or whether it be being an advisor. Failure is so much easier than success that when you see people succeeding, you're like, how do they do that? And I'm really just inspired by that kind of creativity and growth.
Yeah, well, it is inspiring. And the idea that he transformed, I mean, nobody
Mhm.
knows that name, maybe Elton John fans, but the point is when you think of him and what he accomplished and who he is, it's because of the work that he put in. It's
Mhm.
the things he did. And a lot of the things in this book that, it does call on the advisor to do work. It's not a silver bullet. There's no hacks in here, but there's a lot of substance. There are things that absolutely advisors have to do to be successful, and particularly if they want to be the star, the center of their practice for their community. And I've got your book here. I've got a bunch of highlights. I want to talk to you about some
Yes.
of this stuff and get your insights, Matt, because one of the things that I I appreciated about this book is it covers a lot of areas of growing a business. But of course, I'm a marketing guy, I'm a branding guy, so I'm going to zone in on that stuff just to be clear. It doesn't just cover that, but we'll talk about that stuff today because that's what I love.
Mhm.
So, first thing, you talked about how a brand is so important, but it's not just a logo, it's not just the words. And something you said is that building a brand requires you to be your brand. To be your brand in every interaction. What does that mean?
So to me, it's so easy to get caught up. So in this chapter, I talked a lot about David Bowie because I am amazed at who and what David Bowie is. He's someone who has evolved throughout his career. But if there wasn't substance beneath the sizzle there, he would just be a guy in makeup or, tight pants or, there he was so much more than that. He had great musical chops. He was a great musician, great songwriter. And that really to this day is what makes me think so much about that substance that has to be the brand for these advisors. So take me for example. I'm not just some guy that will bounce around stage wearing funny sneakers. It's really there's got to be substance under it. There has to be more than just optimism and enthusiasm and excitement. You have to have real creativity and ideas beneath that, but you also have to have a real empathy for advisors and understanding of what they're going through, and really a desire to help. So I really believe that whatever your brand is, you have to live it and be committed to it because the truth is, this industry has a way of smelling out things that are fake or not real. And ultimately, those are the ones that don't survive. If you really want to stand out, you have to define your brand, stand by it, and ultimately have substance beneath the sizzle. That can be, it's so attractive and easy, right? When you're building a brand to get caught up in things like logos and things like colors and all those things. But if you don't have something to really say beneath it, all that other stuff is going to fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I agree completely. I actually wonder though your opinion on this because when I look at the majority of financial advisors, what I see generally, and this is a generalization, there's always exceptions, but it's that most of them have substance. They're in the business because they have their special ability. They're really good with financial planning. They're really good with investment management. They're really good with people. They care a lot. They care about their clients. They care about getting good outcomes. So what I see more often than not is that they have substance, but they lack sizzle. And I actually occasionally I come across those advisors who were all sizzle, no substance. And
Mhm.
usually they get out of the industry too because they end up doing something they shouldn't be doing, or
Right.
or they get sniffed out, to your point. But but what do you think more advisors struggle with? What do you see? I mean, you at Integrated, obviously you're working with a lot of advisors. I mean, do you think that it's that they lack the ability to develop something of substance that the market wants, or do you think it's that they lack the ability to package it properly?
I think a lot of it has to do with packaging. I think advisors struggle with standing out because they all start to look and sound the same. They have a lot of substance, but it's the same substance as the guy across the street. It's you're not competing necessarily against, other independent advisors. You're competing against every advisor. The truth is, most people, most of your clients, they can't tell the difference between you and the guy that, works for Schwab or the guy that works for Merrill Lynch. They don't know. So really, what is going to make you look different? We use the word dice. What's going to be different, impactful, compelling, exciting? What is going to make you stand out in this space? And I think that's where advisors really struggle is it's part sizzle, but it's part also defining yourself. Okay, who's my audience? Okay, who is my key client? Who's my perfect client that I can grow with? And ultimately, what am I bringing to the table that they can't get anywhere else? And it's the crazy part to me is I've worked with more advisors at Integrated. So much of their success isn't doing all the traditional financial planning, wealth management, investment management pieces. Oftentimes, what makes them stand out is they're that first call when something goes wrong, or you know, the client has a problem and needs to figure out who the best plumber is because for this, and they get a phone call for that. So, really, at the end of the day, advisors are helpers, and if they want to stand out, they have to be the best helper they can be, and really, that empathy we were talking about earlier is so important because if you're going to be that first phone call, you have to be an empathetic ear. You have to be different. And sometimes the sizzle is just a long crackle, and that's enough too. But yeah, I really do agree with you. Advisors lack that sizzle and spark oftentimes. And what's going to make them stand out otherwise?
Yeah. And I love your point, the helper mentality, the empathy.
Yeah.
That's a really great way to forge meaningful connections that last
Yeah.
with your clients. One of the things that I see standing in the way a lot, you address in this book, which is about time and how much time advisors have to really devote to this, because the things you're saying, sometimes I get the finger pointed back at me, like, it's easy for you to say you're a full-time marketer. This is what you do. And, Matt, you can relate to that. You're a
Yeah.
producer, you're a content creator. And so I'm really curious, on page 38, you break down, there's a little assessment they can do. It's actually several pages, but the latter part of it is how much. And it asks the advisor, how much time are you spending in a week on marketing? How much are you currently spending on marketing annually? How much do you plan to budget for marketing? What type of ROI do you anticipate? And with my experience, we serve about 7,000 advisors at 4,000 firms and growing. And I can't even tell you how little they often do or how little they want to do, and yet how big of an ROI they expect. It's
Right.
very baffling to me. So here's what I'd like to know from you. What are the right answers here?
That's a great question. So it's so funny because I think about this a lot. I was at a conference that was Future Proof maybe 2 years ago, might have been last year, where Michael Kitces said, you got to be spending about 15% at least of your revenue on marketing. And like the audience gasps. What's the first thing they get rid of when markets go down? Your marketing. Anything outside, any outsourcing marketing we're doing, that's out the window. But then they're upset when they don't grow. It's Marketing is so essential to growth, but people want growth to kind of happen automatically and accidentally. They want to just kind of like roll into something and then all the clients flood in. It's this they don't but they when it comes to ROI, they expect it to be like, well, I sent out this newsletter and it got me back this many clients. And it just doesn't work that way. There's a long game with marketing that happens. And that's really hard for advisors to comprehend. They don't like a long game, but it's ironic because they want their clients to believe in a long game for investing.
Oh,
So
that's funny.
so
Yeah.
don't you doesn't that frustrate you too as a marketer, that it's like you want your clients to play the long game and trust you, but you don't necessarily trust me because this isn't in your skill set. This isn't what you're successful with. So you just accept that marketing must be the problem when we're not growing, but I don't want to invest the time that it takes for marketing to grow and thrive. Um, it's so funny because I always say, when people say, how much time should I spend in a week on marketing? And I'm like, well, it depends. How much do you want to grow? How much of it, how much of your week is now taken up by all these other activities? If we can give those to other people, how much then could you spend on marketing? And again, go back to question one, how much do you want to grow? Because I think it's a formula that exists here. Your ROI is not going to dictate how much you spend or how much time. It kind of is all these variables that need to work together. And I think at the end of the day, you have to commit real time to marketing for it to be a success. If you outsource it and then upset it doesn't work, it's ridiculous. They have to dedicate the same time back to Snappy Kraken if they really want it to be successful. They have to look at the quantitative metrics that you guys can deliver so they can be successful. They have to be able to give their time to looking at content and making sure that all the pieces are in place so they can get success. Because if they're not looking at read reports and they're not seeing, the prospects that are coming in, then all of a sudden there isn't as much value. But I know there's a lot of value when you work with a firm like Snappy.
Yeah. Well, there is an interesting quote in here about this, which I want to ask you about, because you did just talk about advisors spending time on marketing, and whether they do that with us or somebody else,
Right.
or do everything on their own from scratch. There's a time commitment, but you could argue that if they spend too much time there, they're not cultivating relationships the way they should. They're not doing what they even got in this business to do. And a lot of advisors will say that, look, I didn't get in this business to be a marketer. I got in this business to help people with their financial situation. So that to that point, on page 127, you say marketing is an area that requires a personal touch when it comes to your specific content and voice, but the behind the scenes execution can be handled by a partner, and you go on, right? So where is that line? What do you think advisors need to do to succeed so that things have that personal touch? Because I think this is in a chapter where you're talking about being Elton John, not Mike Gomez, right? So
Right, right. And
yeah,
that's a
so
great
and tell us
story.
what that means too, by the way.
Oh, no
Tell us that
problem.
story too. Yeah.
So that's a great story because Mike Gomez is the guy who designs when Elton goes on tour, he makes sure all of the staging is built properly, all the lighting rigs are correct. Elton John doesn't have that capability. He has somebody else who has that capability. But I'm sure you want to make sure you have a Mike Gomez on your team to handle all that intricacy. We're on a podcast right now. Well, Robert's got a producer, Kyle, who's handling to make sure all of the numbers, all the buttons, everything's done correctly. And the crazy thing is I've done a lot of video work in my life, and I've always had somebody around me who's been smarter and can handle all those elements, so that I can do what I do best, which was creativity, writing, storyboarding. Those are things I can do. So now, when I think about it from an advisor perspective, you want to make sure you have those people that can write, that can execute. And whether it's somebody in-house or somebody that you're outsourcing, that's really, really important to have. But you need to make sure that there is a bit of a personal touch to those. So there, at Integrated, it's a good example. There's pieces that I write for that go out and are white labeled from a lot of different advisors. And that's great. But I also have advisors that I work with who are putting out personal blogs or blogs about the industry. Or what I do is I will meet with them on a weekly or every other week basis. I'll take a download from them, and then I'll help cultivate that into a written piece. So it does have a personal touch. I was just working with an advisor the other day who had a son born a month ago. And the whole piece, the beginning of it is all about, as a new dad, I'm thinking about all these elements that I never even considered before, that for my own personal life, that perhaps I should have, things like wills and estate planning and things like that. So there's a whole personal touch that's his that couldn't be written by anybody else because he just had a child. But the guts of the story about estate planning, any advisor could have written. So my belief is you do it as you go deeper into marketing and you go deeper into content, you want to make sure the content is uniquely yours, but you can also have elements of this that do have kind of a generic touch to them too. I mean, it goes back to the AI conversation. So many people are talking, and I'm sure you're hearing this all the time too. Like, I want to utilize things like our AI to help me write things better. And I'm always like, AI is a good starting point. But if you just copy and paste the answer to that, it's never going to look like you. It's never going to feel like you. But there are elements of it that can help you get started that can be really essential as you create content. Sorry to go off on that
Yeah.
tangent about AI, but I really do feel pretty passionately about that.
No, it's a great point. We can talk about it a little bit actually.
Mhm.
But before we do, I want to ask you, why do you feel so strongly about this? Why do you think it's so important? Because some people would say, well, look, people are out for the information. Give them the information. I don't have to put my personal touch on it. Like, why do you think that matters for an advisor?
Again, I think it goes back to that same problem of how are you distinguishing yourself from all this other email they get on a daily basis? How are you distinguishing yourself from the advisor across the street? How are you standing out? That's so important when it comes to marketing and content. So if you're going to stand out, be personal. Tell a little story. Let this open with your own personal experience here. It's not going to work every time, but it's going to be the difference between something they open and remember and something that they just delete automatically. I always say to folks, and I think I mentioned in the book, you're not just competing for the attention of that advisor across the street either. You're competing with every cat video on the internet. So you literally have to do something that makes you really stand out.
That's it. And you nailed it. And actually, Matt, our own data supports this. We create a timely email every 2 weeks for our advisors to send out. But many times we have a section right at the beginning to insert a personalization.
Mhm,
And the advisors who do get more engagement, they get more responses. And
mhm,
it's because of that reason. I specifically remember one of our clients who, during COVID, every time we'd write an update email through the pandemic to reassure clients, the guy would put a funny picture in the top of the email of him doing something goofy with his kids at home, something entertaining, and
mhm.
his engagement was through the roof. And that's because you can't duplicate that, and that's the human side of this
Right.
business, right?
Right. So, and I love when I write pieces, like there's one piece that we write weekly about the markets as a market update kind of thing. And I like to put a twist on the beginning. It's usually got little pop culture references and things like that. And it'll do well for a while for advisors. And like, well, that did much better at the beginning, Matt. And I'm like, yeah, because eventually the client has seen this trick. And now you have to kind of bring up other things. You don't want to be a one-trick pony with your content. So you have to find ways that are always going to make you stand out and be different. And it's a challenge because, again, to your point, and you said it first, these advisors aren't marketers. So they're not thinking about it and you think about things in a really logical way. You give data behind it. Me, it's usually a lot of enthusiasm and excitement, and I go, "Come on, you got to stand behind me and believe me." But that's why I love, your take on this, because I think it's so grounded in data and so grounded in what you've seen for years.
Yeah, well, you nailed it in here, Matt. And I gotta say, thinking about that advisor using AI, I want to dig into that a little bit,
Mhm.
because it is going to change the game. It will continue to change the game. It's getting more advanced. It's doing more, and it does have its place.
Mm.
And if an advisor is listening to this and thinking, "Yeah, I need to do more marketing, and AI is a shortcut," which it is actually a great helper, but you
Mhm.
said it's a start. So help me understand, if you're making a recommendation for an advisor who wants to proliferate content, they're trying to decide how to use AI, what's your position on the right way to use it?
I think it is exactly that. It's a good start, a good entry point. Now, first things first, I always say this, like, probably protect all of us. Um, Ask compliance, make sure that you're working in the correct system. But content, usually it's so generic at that point, you're not going to get yourself in trouble. I mean, if you're putting in client data, well, you have another whole hill to be worried about. So let's put that one aside. Let's assume that everything's compliant to start off with. But to me, it is a good jumping off point so that you can get and make sure that you're validating some of your ideas. I also believe AI is better when you're putting things in, and then it will bring you back some good things as well. So if you have some initial starting points or bullets and then could put that into AI, it will give you back something that's a little more full as well. But again, it only knows so much. It only knows what's already been put out there. People have said to me already, "Are you worried AI will, eliminate, the kind of marketing you do?" And I'm like, "No, because I have a different creative vein that I can go through that it's not considering." It like you and you're the same way, Robert. You have a whole system of knowledge and collective knowledge that's really unique. I say to our CEO Paul all the time, I said, I bet we have very different search histories on our computers. And my brain is going in 100 directions. And last week I was writing a piece and I was talking about Peter Boyle, it was in Young Frankenstein. And there's lots of elements of what we do creatively that AI is never going to be able to mirror. But even for advisors, so when they read a piece, and maybe it's a really smart 5 bullets on estate planning, right? They're going to be able to put a different twist on it than anybody else can. They have a different life experience that they can open with. They also can fact check from their own minds about things that perhaps AI does not have that experience of, where they're like even sometimes it's order, right? They're like, I never talk about um, guardianship before I talk about wills, so I'm going to do it in this. I put it in this order. That's great. That's bringing your own touch to something that, again, maybe AI can help lay that foundation, but you're going to help build the house upon that. And you're going to put all the nice finishing on it to really make it a real livable house and not just a slab of concrete.
Yeah, you nailed it. My personal use of AI is very similar. I do a lot with voice notes,
Oh, yeah.
and my automatically transcribed voice notes can become really great fodder for AI, because I can sketch out an entire article or blog post or piece of content, and then I can ask AI to help me organize it, reformat it, but it's all me. And I've trained it with my voice. I have all my other writings in there. And so it comes out, it looks pretty close. But then I still have to edit. I still have
Right.
to edit and refine and make it my own, but it probably cuts my time by a third, maybe a half, so I'm more productive. But I think about AI like that. I mean, it's a productivity tool. If Excel, Microsoft Excel was a productivity tool for numbers and spreadsheets, you don't have to use paper and pen. Now you can use Excel and create formulas. You don't have to have a separate calculator. It'll calculate automatically. That's a tool that speeds up the process. AI is a tool that speeds up the process, but it doesn't take the place of human thought. And if you do try to get it to take the place of your thought, you will end up with something that lacks any differentiation whatsoever, and that won't win, because
Right.
you said it before. People have seen this before. The tricks stop working, and the collective consciousness is never going to excite anybody.
I agree completely. I think it is so important to always put your own flair on anything that would be
Yeah.
created. And sometimes people come to me and say, "Oh, I hired this writer and he was terrible. He gave me back this piece and it just didn't work at all." And I was like, "Well, did you then edit it? You were trying, was your hope somebody was going to give you something that perfectly reflected what you would say. I mean, I was like, that's wild. I work with our advisors all the time, and I'll send them pieces and say, here, this is for your review. And then I go, I'm sorry, I made some changes. Like, why are you sorry? You're supposed to make changes. It's supposed to sound like you. If I use a word that makes sense in my brain or a word that I use all the time, but you would never say that word, change it to a word you would use. Make it uniquely yours. That's the most important thing.
Yep. And with flair. I like
Yes.
that. Flair, Matt. Yeah. Hey, for people who are bored with Elton John references because they're hip hop fans,
Mhm.
we might say there's nothing in the book for them, or would I be wrong about that?
You would be wrong about that. And it's always funny when people meet me and they're like, you like the Wu-Tang Clan? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm the whitest Wu-Tang fan ever, probably. I'm almost clear. But at the same time, it's like I am so passionate about the way you can learn from what different musical artists have done and the way that Wu-Tang approached creativity and having, five different artists who are almost, kind of trying to one up each other in their first album to then realizing like there was real design around that, around all of the things they did, so that ultimately they didn't step on each other. Ultimately, they were able to build on their success. Method Man has success as an individual artist before Wu Tang Clan comes out, so they're able to kind of build on that when their first album comes out. It's so impressive to me and amazing that I was like, I've got to include a chapter here about Wu Tang. And it's funny to me when people mention there's a Wu Tang chapter in here, the Taylor Swift, and I'm like, I am just so enthralled by music and like creativity that I'm like, you're gonna find it everywhere, especially. And if you listen to that, like I can still remember when I was writing that chapter, I'm literally in Boston, walking around Boston Garden, and I'm like formulating the chapter in my head as Wu-Tang is pulsing in my headphones, and I'm like, and I'm singing along. I'm like, these people walking past me must think I'm a crazy person, but to each his own.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Protect your neck. That's
Yes.
the title of the chapter.
Hmm.
It's funny though. I gotta say, just being candid, the first sentence in the chapter did make me chuckle. I was like, I don't know, that's a stretch, Matt. But actually, after I read the chapter, I was like, no, these are good lessons. But you said, what can we learn from the Wu Tang Clan about growing a business and being a better entrepreneur? The answer, everything. I said everything. Come on now. But there are some good lessons in here, and one of them I think is a great lesson that you adapted. And I don't really know how you got to the Wu-Tang from the Wu-Tang Clan to this, but you did it because that's you're a creative thinker and you're mapping all this out creatively. But there is a lesson in this chapter. I'm not going to tell everybody the train of thought that got to it, but yes, there's a Wu-Tang connection. So Matt said, you find that advisors are wasting hours every day lost in their inbox, get into the office, start scrolling through email. Pretty soon they're having coffee. They got a morning meeting. Nothing was productive. No big planning, no big thinking. It was wasted deleting spam. So, first of all, this kind of shocked me because I was like, man, how do you run a business like that? I never want to look at my email first thing. But you said you're seeing this a lot. So, like, what do you recommend? Like, first of all, why is this a problem? How do advisors break away from it when they do shift their mindset and break away from it? How does it change their business? Give us some advice.
Because so much of it starts with what is time well spent? I think we've reached places in our career, in our life, where what got us to this spot is not going to take us to the next spot. So much of us, I don't want to speak for everyone, but like we didn't grow up. I didn't have an email address till I was in college. And a lot of advisors, it was much later because they're a little older than we are. And so when they begin to see success in a day of like, well, I did this. I went through my email, I answered these emails, then I had this meeting and it was a day well spent. And you're like, well, is that a day well spent? Think about your skill set as an advisor. They could do things so much more productive than be going through emails and inboxes. And so much of it comes down to having a team around you that can hone that down. Sometimes it's not just a team, sometimes it's a process. Sometimes it's about disciplining yourself about things like, okay, I read emails at this time of day for this long. And I've disciplined my client base to know I turn around and respond on that email within 24 hours. I think one of the big mistakes we make, and I make it a lot, I'm going to be honest with you, is we get an email and we want to respond immediately. We see that as productive. We see that as time well spent. But essentially, what you're doing, you have to think about is you've moved that email to the top of your to do list over top of all the other things you wanted to accomplish in that day. And sometimes you're going to succeed and sometimes you're going to fail. And there are clients, there are instances where you have to deal with things immediately. But you have to get disciplined within yourself and know your time is valuable. The ideas in your head, the to-do list, all those things you want to accomplish today are very valuable. It the very strange thing that happens even here in this house is my wife will say to people, Matt spent the day in the office. He only had 3 meetings. Isn't he lucky? And I'm like, yeah, but I spend a lot of time thinking about new ideas, creating things. Sometimes it's writing. Sometimes it's just, you spend an hour going, I know we're going to have our conference next year in Austin, Texas. So I want to do a bunch of reading and understanding about Austin so I can create themes around this conference that are true to this place in geography. Well, none of that's anything people are going to see at the end of the day, but it might touch into the theme we create and have major ramifications on a major event that we do each year. So yeah, it probably looks silly from the outside looking in when people like you and I do things that are, it's not, you're not going to specifically be able to write down on paper what happened today, but it's going to have a huge impact down the line. And so it's just, to me, I think when I think about all of us when it comes to productivity, we waste a lot of minutes and a lot of time because that's what we've always done is this thing. I was talking to my wife before. I'm thinking about when we met 15 years ago and what a productive day was. Um, and the amount of time that I would spend doing things in those early years as still a web editor at Investment News. I would get up at 6. I'd be going through, pulling articles. I'd be editing. I'd be putting things into newsletters. So was that busy? Was that time well spent? Or is time well spent now sometimes going through and thinking about bigger ideas and strategizing? And I just think and again, it just depends. But I think no one could probably do the weird stuff that's because formulating those ideas about Austin into something isn't something anybody else could do. That web editor job, I'm sure Investment News has had 10 people since me that's done a great job at it.
Yep. Space to think. Give yourself
Mhm.
space to think. And
Yes.
I know personally, just what rings true about everything you said. Some of my best ideas come to me when I'm on vacation. If I
Yes.
actually get out of the office for a few days, pretty soon my mind reverts back to work and I start thinking about things and I have lots of aha moments. And sometimes those become strategy. So you're spot on. And by the way, for anybody listening, just a reminder that everything we've talked about came out of Center Stage. So buy it, read it, do the stuff in it. You will be more successful. You will have more fun. And Matt, I've got to give you the opportunity here because I picked out some things I loved from the book, but this is called Steal My Strategy. And I know there's things in the book that you really love. So if you wanted everybody to have like one big takeaway from the book or one section that you really love that you think everybody should absolutely read and steal, what would you highlight?
So I'm going to give you one section of the book that you should steal and use. And then I'm going to give you kind of a very meta answer on this because I've been thinking about steal my strategy all day. Um, so from a book perspective, there's a really interesting chapter in there about Van Halen, and there's a conversation about the brown M&Ms. The brown M&M story is something we've heard for years. Van Halen had it in their rider; they weren't allowed to have any brown M&Ms in the catering table, and people always took that and said, "Wow, isn't Van Halen a bunch of divas? Why wouldn't they allow brown M&Ms at the catering table?" And the truth of the matter is, it was their way of making sure that all of the details, all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed when it came to safety at their venues and events. Because as you traveled the country, especially in the 70s and early 80s, these are the first days of arena concerts. And if somebody was, not paying attention to those things, you could have real tragedy on your hands at these concerts. So it is so important. That idea of diva isn't a bad thing. Having people that pay attention to detail and are really specific about it are really, really important people. I've been lucky in my career to have worked with some great copy editors that have probably saved my butt more times than I can count because they made sure I didn't get myself in trouble when it came to some of the content I wrote. So stealing your strategy, you steal something from Van Halen, pay attention to the details. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad about it. Have somebody in your team that's really detail oriented. From a meta standpoint, if you want to steal my strategy when it comes to content, make sure there's entertainment along with the information. We spend so much time trying to be brilliant. We stop trying to be interesting and fun. And the truth of the matter is, and I'm sure you can attest to this, Robert, you probably have a bookshelf that's full of books from a lot of really important, inspiring people, smart people in this industry, but most of them aren't that much fun to read because they're trying so hard to be brilliant. They stopped trying to be entertaining. And the truth is that's something I wanted this book to be, is something that's readable, something that's fun. You're on an airplane. I think a lot about what you can digest. And as human beings, it's short chapters, be engaging, and tell stories. That is how you're ultimately going to stand out. That's the strategy you should steal.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this podcast, Matt. Thank you for sharing your brilliance with us today. The conversation was a delight as always. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, follow you, what's the best way?
You can always, I'm always available on social media. Check me out on Twitter at Acadyack, Aketyack. That has oddly been my handle since it was a column I had in college at Seton Hall in '97. People have said to me, "Where'd that come from?" Anyway, yep, check me out on there. And if you want a copy of the book, head over to Amazon. Be glad for you to check it out, write a review. Tell me what you think. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Matt. It's been real. And until next time.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.